Next up, we are going to have a talk from Dr. Alexander Panchin. So I will switch off and allow that to appear.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hello, Dr. Alex. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you for
what time is it there?
It's 0:40 a.m. So it's a night, but I'm a night person, so it's just the most comfortable time for me.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Okay, well, let me introduce you to the audience. So
Okay.
Dr. Alexander Panchin has a PhD in computational biology and is a member of the Commission on Pseudoscience of the Russian Academy of Sciences. He's written a range of popular science books in Russian about biotech and debunking myths around GMOs. So what makes pseudoscientific ideas so popular? Using viruses as a metaphor, Dr. Panchin will show how our minds are susceptible to certain ideas in the same way that cells can be vulnerable to pathogens that replicate at their expense. I'm very much looking forward to Dr. Panchin's talk, so I'll switch off my video and let you take it away.
Okay, thank you. I have still clicking disabled in the clicking application, so it would be great if I could use it. Right. Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be giving a talk here. It's a very rare opportunity for me to speak in English, and I really enjoy speaking in English. I lived for some time in the United States when I was a child, but now I am in Russia, and I'm going to talk a lot about Russian pseudoscience, but pseudoscience in general as well. And I will start by giving a few words about the commission in which I'm a member of. And my first slide is Putin versus homeopathy. I'm going to explain this slide. You see there are two lines here. This is actually Google Trends. And you can guess that the red line here is the word Putin, how popular Putin is. And the blue line is homeopathy. And you can see that homeopathy is much less popular than Putin in Google search engines. And here on the left, you can see a peak when homeopathy for a short period of time became more popular than Putin. What happened at that moment? At that moment, our commission published a document that criticized homeopathy with much detail. And that document became very famous in Russia. All of the media cited it, everybody discussed it. And for the next several years, we've seen the drops of homeopathy sales in Russia. We can't, of course, say that this is causality because there is no good control group for this kind of experiment. But it's true that most media in Russia following our report gave mostly skeptical towards homeopathy videos and reports. And that was something I was very impressed with, that we could do something of that magnitude in Russia. And even international press also covers this memorandum on homeopathy. So what we do in our commission is we try to investigate claims of pseudoscience and to inform the public about why these claims are wrong and why you shouldn't believe in them. And that's what I do. We don't get paid for this. This is just social work, if you want to call it like that. And today I would like to talk about my experience in understanding on what pseudoscience is, how it's spread. And I am indeed going to use a metaphor. And of course, metaphors aren't strict science. And so please consider this as a story more than an educational lecture, but I will quote some scientific research as well. So what is actually a virus, right? What's the similarity between a biological virus, a computer virus, or say an idea that humans have evolved from dolphins, which is quite popular in some Russian books and pseudoscientific courses, actually, you can find in the internet. A virus is simply some kind of information that uses hosts for reproduction. And if we expand on this metaphor, we can look at biological viruses, and I'm a biologist, so I have some experience with investigating how they work. And viruses, they interact with cells through certain interfaces. So like, for example, HIV interacts with a CCR5 receptor on the membrane of certain cells, and that is its point of entry. And so biological viruses exploit certain vulnerabilities of cells. And these vulnerabilities actually are something adaptive, which is something good for the cells, but viruses use that for their own gain. And so in a similar sense, you can name numerous vulnerabilities that the human mind also has, which can be used as a means for entry for different kinds of pseudoscientific viruses. Well, one of the famous examples is the Barnum effect, actually discovered by Bertram Forer, who gave students some tests on their personality, and then he gave them a description of their personality and asked them to rate it, and everybody rated it 4 or 5 out of 5, or most of them rated 4 or 5 out of 5, and then it turned out that they all got the same personality description taken from a horoscope, and that's called the Barnum effect. And so if you look at many different kinds of pseudoscientific ideas, many of them rely on this point of entry, like astrology, palm reading, phrenology, or physiognomy, or samotypology. That's actually something more existent in Russia. It's when you try to tell what a person is as a person, what's his personality based on his body, like how fat he is or something. It can be quite actually, unethical in some cases, but it's getting popularity in Russia. And we have a Russian version of MBTI called Socionics, which also tries to classify people into groups by a very primitive test. And all of them, they kind of interact with the audience by giving them personality descriptions, and people look at those descriptions and say, it's about me, but actually it's a very vague description. And so this works for many different kinds of ideas as a point of entry. Another example I really like is the ideomotor phenomenon, which was studied by psychologists William Carpenter and Michael Chevreul. And Chevreul, I'm sorry for my pronunciation, it might be not correct. So Chevreul, he gave people a pendulum, and he asked them to imagine with eyes closed the movement of this pendulum clockwise or counterclockwise without moving the pendulum. And for many people, the pendulum would start to move to their surprise. And so it turned out that just thinking about an action could turn into us performing that action without actually acknowledging it. And so this phenomenon was discovered. And then William Carpenter said that, well, perhaps this is something that could explain why dowsing with a rod is so popular. And so we also have a series of ideas which use this effect, this psychological effect, as a means of entry into the human mind as something credible, like table turning, dowsing, facilitated communication, if you take the modern ideas, or the Ouija board, or the magic pendulums, which can be used to identify magical properties of crystals and things like that. I really enjoyed one of the first experiments that showed does table turning work? So mediums, they believe that they can summon a ghost and the table will start turning. And Michael Faraday himself, the famous physicist, he put an experiment. He put pieces of gooey substance, he put some gooey substance on the rotating table, and he put pieces of paper on top of it and asks the mediums to put their hands on top of the pieces of paper. And so if the table was turned by ghosts, then the table would move first and then the hands would move after it. But in reality, of course, it turned out that the hands go first and then the table starts rotating. And this is because of the ideomotor effect. So that's the explanation, and it's a point of entry for certain ideas. A final example, of course, I could give you much more examples of this, but I don't want to waste too much time because most of these things are well known to the skeptic community, is the illusion of causality. That is the entry point for most alternative medicine. And on this slide, I'm sorry for the text in Russian, but it's a news picture from Russia. It's a very famous Russian alternative doctor who invented a method of curing hemorrhoids by using a cucumber and putting it into the place where you have the hemorrhoid. And the most important thing about this method is that the cucumber has to be connected to the earth, so that the power of the cucumber, the power of the earth would channel through the cucumber. And so we have a lot of this kind of stuff in Russia. It's very crazy. And so there is one study which really impressed me in terms of showing how alternative medicine works. At this moment, I don't see if my slide has changed, but I hope it did. And you see a graph from a study where people who had, I'm sorry, could I see my presentation, please? So the study on people who had asthma, and they were, each person in the study, he would, in a random sequence, get a certain kind of treatment. One of them was a real drug against asthma, which he had to inhale. Oh, I'm sorry. my slide did not change. Yeah, that mixed me up. I didn't see my slide, and my previous slide was about different kinds of alternative medicine which exists in the world. And so you probably know all kinds of examples from lithotherapy and magnet therapy to homeopathy and so on. Yeah, so now the slide about the asthma, which is more important. So people who had asthma, they had 4 kinds of interventions. One of them was a real drug against asthma. One was placebo inhaler. One was a sham acupuncture. And one was a non-intervention control. And so there were 2 ways to measure the efficiency of these treatments. One was to use a device that measures your the way you breathe, a respirometer. And so it turned out that the real drug against asthma works, and everything else doesn't work comparing to that drug. But if you asked people whether or not something worked, some intervention worked, then you would see that all of the interventions, they worked in a similar way in terms of personal perception of how they worked, comparing to the non-intervention control. So people can be easily deceived into thinking that something works when it actually doesn't. And that's why all of these kind of stuff, from homeopathy and lithotherapy to urine therapy, also popular in Russia, become so predominant and so easily to acquire. So now that a virus, a pseudoscientific virus, has entered the human brain, there are 2 mechanisms I would like to talk about, which it can use to kind of counter the fact that this is something that science does not accept. One of them, and in this metaphor, science would be some kind of immune system against bad ideas. Science is the way we test hypotheses and we try to find out what actually works and what doesn't. And so science is what you do to find out if homeopathy works or not. And so some people who believe in pseudoscientific ideas, they would try to say, well, science is actually not that good. Science is something bad. You shouldn't use it. Science was created by witches. That's actually a real quote. This person on the left, his name is German Sterligov. He's a very famous Russian entrepreneur who is famous for anti-scientific, homophobic, and other beliefs he tries to press onto the public. For example, once he put pictures of different scientists like Einstein and others, and he would throw rotten tomatoes into their faces and made a video about that and posted it on the internet. He does these kind of stunts, and often is invited to television and stuff like that. And so his idea is that science is bad. Science is destroying the world. It's bad for humans. It's bad for ecology. But this point of view, when you try to demolish science, demolish the immune system, it can have consequences. Like when he asked his subscribers to donate money for a plane ticket, some of them said that, well, planes were invented by witch scientists and you should use horses instead. So you can get these negative consequences. And the other way which you can do to combat the situation is say, actually, no, we are a legitimate science. In fact, here are some peer-reviewed papers or something like that. You try to make it look like you're doing science, but you're actually not doing science. So let's first talk about destroying the immune system, the critical thinking of our brains. HIV is a virus that destroys the actual immune system. And so we can look for something similar in viral ideas. And the way you can destroy the immune system is to say, well, that all scientists are part of some kind of conspiracy. And in a similar way as HIV, by destroying the immune system, makes it easy for different opportunistic infections to cause harm to the body of the immunocompromised person. The same way, actually, even some very, let's say, harmless ideas, like say the idea that the earth is flat, can cause a lot of damage because they promote further conspiracy ideation. For example, this was shown in a documentary which I recommend called Behind the Curve. It's a documentary about flat earthers, about how they have their own dating sites, how they have their own conferences like ours, how they share ideas and how they think, how they talk, how they live with their family and stuff like that. And so in this movie, they show this logic on particular cases of flat earthers, where they say, well, so the earth is flat, we know it, and scientists are covering it up. What other things are scientists covering up? And then they go and talk about GMOs, that they're actually evil, vaccinations, they cause autism, COVID-19, is a hoax, HIV is a hoax, and so on. And some of these ideas, they can be quite dangerous when people say they don't want to vaccinate or they don't believe in a virus that exists. And I think this was very well covered by Eliezer Yudkowsky in Harry Potter and Methods of Rationality, when he talks about this, that lies, they promote more lies. And when somebody is trying to sell you some kind of drug that doesn't work, he will have to, at a certain point, deny the scientific method itself. He would say that, well, this drug has to be proven by some other means, like a revelation, or by talking to a ghost, or you should denounce the scientific method and just believe that this drug works. And that's what it comes up to when an idea is so bad it is not accepted by science. And in Russia, one of the most cited philosophers in the anti-science establishment is Paul Feyerabend, because he is a philosopher who is quite known, and his ideas can be very well used to support this destruction of the immune system. Because what does Feyerabend say in his famous philosophical text called Against the Method, if I'm translating it correctly, because I know the name in Russian, I've read it in Russian, but never mind that, is that he says that, well, there is no reason to think that science is better than, say, astrology, that astronomy is better than astrology. It's just different worldviews. And he kind of tries to argue that by saying that, well, there are a lot of ways where unscientific ideas have led to scientific advancements. And what's funny is what kinds of examples he gives when he talks about these advancements. And he talks about things like acupuncture, like moxibustion, or post-diagnosis. So maybe in the times of Paul Feyerabend, nobody actually tried to investigate whether or not post-diagnosis works, but today we know it doesn't. Here is a study where they took people who practiced traditional Indian Ayurvedic medicine and used post-examination, and they tried to see whether or not different experts in this field could give the same diagnosis to a number of people. So you have a person, if he has a real post-diagnosis, then probably different experts will give him the same post-diagnosis. But it turned out that the coincidences in the opinions of different experts in this field are similar to random guess. So probably doesn't work. But that's the thing. So you try to believe that some pseudoscience works, and then you have to, but it doesn't, and then you have to say that science doesn't work at all. You just need different methods, alternative methods of thinking. So that's what I can say about this immune suppression. But we also have mimicry. Viruses can also have mimicry. Real viruses, biological viruses, they can use parts of a cell to try to hide from the immune system. And we see the same thing with pseudoscientific ideas. Every time science discovers something new, some scientific word becomes popular, somebody tries to make a drug or a product based on this word, which has nothing to do with science, and sell it. So when radioactivity was a very famous and new word, somebody tried to invent radioactive toothpaste or uranium ice cream or creams that would make your face look better with radioactive ingredients, or water with radiation that would cure diseases. When electricity was discovered, the same thing happened. Or when magnets were discovered, the same thing happened. We have MRIs, that's fine, but we also have all kinds of magnets to make water more healthy for you, and you have these magnet bracelets that cure cancer and things like that, very popular in Russia. Electricity, well, the thing on the left that cures man weakness might actually work for some men. I won't judge, but electric water with electricity as a means to cure all kinds of diseases. So using a scientific idea to promote some products. If you take biology, the most popular trend in biology is stem cell research. Everybody knows that stem cells have something to do with regeneration. And so we have a lot of products which claim to contain stem cells that can treat the problems of aging. Some of them contain plant stem cells, which doesn't make really much sense because the reason why stem cells work is because human stem cells, they turn into other kinds of human cells, which are lost during our life, and so they replace them, those old cells, those dead cells. But plant stem cells, they can't turn into human cells, so I don't see how this should actually work, but it's a very popular marketing scheme. And sometimes it's good that they don't use human stem cells, because there was this very famous case when a woman tried to use human stem cells, mesenchymal stem cells, to cure wrinkles on her face. But these stem cells, aside from being able to turn into fat cells, which would give the desired effect, they can also turn into bone cells, for example. And so somebody had to perform eye surgery on this woman to remove a bone that was made in her eye. They saved her eye, but that's probably not a good thing. And these things can have health consequences when they're not controlled, and they are not controlled in a number of countries. Quantum, that's probably the most famous word that can be exploited to promote pseudoscience, because even physicists not always understand how quantum mechanics works, as some physicists claim to say. And so we have a lot of medicine which are claimed to be quantum medicine without actually any explanation of how it could work, just buzzwords, pseudo explanations. For me, this reminds me of my favorite computer game called Mass Effect. In this game, people have invented interstellar travel. They have invented ways for bionics where people can manipulate energy and have telekinesis and things like that. And everything in this game is explained by this mysterious mass effect. And we don't really know what it is, but it just works. And it's fine for science fiction, but imagine that you're going to a doctor and you ask him, how does the drug work? And he says, well, it works by mass effect. And that's the same thing we have with these quantum healers. Here is an example of how it's used by particular proponents of pseudoscience in Russia. So when we had this memorandum about homeopathy, that it doesn't work, published, homeopaths tried to debunk us and to explain how homeopathy actually works. And here is an example by Alexei Karpeyev, who is chairman of the National Council of Homeopathy of Russia. He says that a homeopathic drug is a combination of quantum fields which are created with a technology of potentiation, which interact with similar quantum fields of the organism through bioresonance. Like interacts with like. So this is just meaningless. This makes no sense. It has nothing to do with quantum physics. It's just taking something, diluting it in water, and then hitting on a wooden surface with your dilution, and then diluting it one more time, and then more and more and more and more. But that's not really scientifically sounding, is it? So that's why you have to invent all of these buzzwords. There's a very good study by Gordon Pennycock on the reception and detection of pseudo-profound bullshit, in which they gave people random strings of, let's say, words that sound smart. They were just generated randomly into strings of text, and many people would find these strings of text meaningful, and especially those people who believe in various viral pseudoscientific ideas. One more example of such mimicry is something that's currently going on in Russia and is of great concern for me and my commission. You see this device. It costs several $100,000. It's called Tor, and it's a device to destroy the coronavirus. And it was accepted and approved by the Russian Ministry of Health. So it's an official medical device. And this is how it works. It works by creating a wave antidote to the spectrum which is emitted by SARS-CoV-2 RNA. This method of wave noise successfully suppresses the coronavirus. This is just gibberish, but somebody read this and said, this is scientific. This was read by people who work at the health department of Russia. And it just shows the level of incompetence and the eagerness to accept such buzzwords as something meaningful. So what other things can we learn from the viral world? What can happen? And maybe we can translate something of this into the metaphor I'm using. Some viruses, they can reassort, like several versions of the flu virus can combine in one cell, exchange some of their genetic material, and you get new viruses which can be more dangerous and more infective to humans. And something very similar can happen with pseudoscientific ideas. This is something probably not known in the Western culture, not known in New Zealand, but in Russia, we have this thing called human design, When I first heard about it, I thought, well, maybe they're trying to make genetically modified babies or something. But no, it's not about that. It's about combining the Hinduistic system of chakras, Western astrology, Jewish Kabbalah, and Chinese I Ching. But generally, it's just using the same old Barnum effect to say, you enter your date of birth on a site, you pay them some money, and you get what you see on the picture on the left. This is called the body graph. That's my body graph. It looks very scientific to a person who doesn't know what science is. And you look at it and say, they probably did some research on that. And then you ask them, how does it work? And this is an explanation given by one of their experts. We know about genetics and quantum physics. We know about the 64 DNA codons of our genetic matrix. We receive the unique combination from our parents, but our system also accounts for such objective parameters as the stream of neutrinos that passed through planets during the moment of birth and activated certain codons. The neutrino is the transmitter of information. And once again, we see that, this is bullshit. I'm sorry for using this word, neutrinos. This is how a neutrino detector looks like. And even if neutrinos could cause mutations in DNA, it would be much more relevant if those interactions would occur not on the moment of birth, but when the spermatozoid or oocyte were formed, or when the embryo was formed. It doesn't make any sense, but that's how they sell it. They make it look like it's science. They use mimicry, and in that case, also reassortment of different ideas. I'm sorry. So what comes next? Well, viruses, when we try to treat them with certain drugs like antiretrovirals for HIV, some of them get demolished by those treatments, but some of them are resistant, and the resistant ones survive and they evolve and they become predominant. And we also see similar things happening in the world of countering pseudoscience. Like when we talk about homeopathy, that it doesn't work, many people learn about it. Many people find out that homeopathy is funny. It doesn't make sense. There are many memes about homeopathy. And so some people try to get rid of the word homeopathy while still selling sugar to people. So the names of these drugs on the slide, they are in Russian. These are all Russian drugs. But when I give this lecture in Russia, I often ask the auditorium to say, please stand up if you are skeptical of homeopathy, but you have taken any of these drugs. And about half of the auditorium, which are usually enlightened people who enjoy scientific lectures, they stand up. That's how popular this is. All of these drugs on these slides, they are not called homeopathy, they're called release active drugs. And all of them are in fact homeopathy. They're just not called homeopathy. They are registered as regular drugs. And this is a meme we have about them. And we have drugs and they're cheap generics called sugar. Here is one example of such a drug called anaferon. What it does is, well, if you look at the label, what its contents are, how does it work? It would say that it contains 0.003 grams of antibodies to interferon gamma. And you might think, well, the concentration is fine. Antibodies sound something scientific, and interferon gamma has something to do with the immune response. So maybe it's an actual valid drug, and it's sold in a drugstore. But if you look at the fine print, you will see that the antibodies are added after a dilution of 10 to the power of minus 15 nanograms per gram. So if you make the calculation, if you multiply all the numbers, you find out that there are no antibodies in this drug. It's just sugar, 100% sugar and nothing else, maybe just some other non-specific components in the tablet. And this is sold for billions of rubles, so hundreds of millions of dollars in Russia. And not just in Russia, and not just against things like influenza, because these are all kinds of diseases which are claimed to be treated by these release active drugs. It can be encephalitis, it can be meningitis, it can be allergies, sugar against diabetes, alcoholism, and they are developing a drug against HIV based on these principles. And also a drug against coronavirus, as you could have guessed. And it's not just Russia. They have managed to export these drugs to a number of countries, not the US, not New Zealand, not Australia, not Europe, but many, many countries in the world. And the scariest thing about this is the multiple drug resistance. So in the past, you would say, well, okay, how do we say if this is science or this is pseudoscience? Well, we could look at the scientific literature. Maybe there are some published peer-reviewed papers about it. And if there aren't, then probably it's not something you should concern yourself as science, not something you shouldn't consider as science. But what if there is? And so some of the pseudoscientific ideas, they manage to hijack scientific journals. So here you see a list of scientific journals which published at some point articles claiming that these homeopathic drugs, which are not called homeopathic, but they are in fact have no active substance, work. And some of these journals are quite renowned. For some cases, the explanation is very similar. If you look at the bottom, there's this journal called Bulletin of Experimental Biology and Medicine. It's a Russian journal, which is also published by Springer. The English version is published by Springer. And in one of these journals, there was a special issue which had over 40 articles about this homeopathy published in the same issue. And guess what? The owner of the company was the editor of the special issue. So in this case, we can see the conflict of interest. And in Russia, we have a very big issue of conflict of interest being ignored. So it's very difficult to trust Russian science. But of the other journals, there are international journals. And so what we do in our commission is we try to find errors in these studies, and we write to the journals, and sometimes we get retractions. And for this particular case of release active drugs, we got 6 articles retracted. Here are some examples. We also got 2 articles get a notice of concern, which is not a big victory, but still. Some journals would publish criticism. Some journals, one journal, BMJ Evidence-Based Medicine, it did not publish the bad pseudoscientific papers. It just published our review about other journals publishing pseudoscientific papers on homeopathy, which is not labeled as homeopathy. And we found out that actually some reviewers, they didn't understand that the drugs in question had nothing in them. And that's also scary. And the most funny thing about this is that actually the errors you find in some of these articles made by Russian scientists, some of whom are at the status of members of the Academy of Science. So they have real degrees and they have they're in the high ranks of this Russian scientific elite, is that these errors can be found by children. So here is me giving a lesson to children at a summer camp a year before COVID-19 under Moscow. And so I told them some ideas about how pseudoscience works. And then I gave them 4 papers published by this member of the Russian Academy of Sciences and asked them to find errors in these papers. I haven't read those papers in advance, so I didn't know if they actually contain obvious errors or not. And the children found errors in every single one of them. And one of the papers got retracted based on the comments made by children, school children, like this paper here, in which the authors, they made it look like the drug works by putting the relevant control groups and the experimental groups into 2 different tables so that nobody can actually compare and find out that the drug doesn't work different than placebo. It's really funny. So they know that the drug isn't different from placebo, but to avoid making that conclusion, they put the result on the placebo and on the drug into 2 different tables and then onto 2 different graphs. The children found it out, made a statistical calculation that there is no difference, and said, well, how did that get published? So, of course, the idea of ideas being an object of evolution like viruses and spreading like viruses is not something I invented. Richard Dawkins, in the famous Selfish Gene, he coined the term meme as a cultural unit that follows Darwinian evolution. This idea of cultural evolution was then researched by a number of authors, and there is a very good book about this by Alex Mesodi called Cultural Evolution for those who are interested. And there's also a very good review about it. But memes are not just funny pictures of cats or dogs or something like that, but memes can be like important ideas that are that affect how our society works. And what's funny is that how ideas evolve is very different in the scientific community and in the general public. Like nobody expects people to go door to door and say, would you like to talk about quantum mechanics? Unlike people walking door to door and asking to talk about things like God. So maybe because quantum mechanics does not promise you an afterlife. It does not promise you hell if you don't believe in it. Maybe because it was not invented by a burning bush, and so it does not contribute to such an intriguing and easy to retell story. So in the scientific community, the landscape of adaptation is that we select those ideas which are reliable, which can be tested, which confirm to the evidence, while in the general public, those ideas which survive are those which are the best as viruses. And so we get evolution of such viral ideas. And to end my talk, I would like to give 3 conclusions I have for myself from this metaphor, if you wish. And one is that, well, the viral ideas, they will persist. And if some kind of idea is very popular, it doesn't mean that it's a good idea or that it helps people. Like, for example, flu is a virus which is very popular. Most people have caught flu a number of times in their lifetime. It doesn't mean it's good to get flu. It just means that a virus can infiltrate our bodies. And the same thing comes with ideas. A popular idea isn't necessarily a good one to have. And the second point is that, well, ideas are the enemy, not people. One of my favorite cartoons is South Park, and there they had this episode where the actor Russell Crowe, he had a show where he would travel around the world and he would fight people and he would beat people up. And somebody told him that it's not a constructive thing to do and he should probably do something useful with his life, like, I don't know, fight cancer. And next moment he is going to a cancer hospital and he is kicking cancer patients. And that's a joke, like you shouldn't do that. And that's the same thing with pseudoscientific ideas. People sometimes they get very angry at those who, skeptics as well, can get very angry at people who are actually victims of these bad ideas. You don't go and fight people because they have the flu. You don't say they're bad people. You just say you've got the flu. You should get treatment. And the same thing, I think, follows with pseudoscientific ideas. And the final point is that, well, as we can acquire resistance to certain viruses by changing the targets which they affect, like, for example, some people have a mutation, the CCR5 receptor of that with which HIV interacts, and some people can actually be immune to HIV because of these mutations. In a similar way, people can learn to remove these interfaces between themselves and these pseudoscientific ideas. In this article in PLOS ONE, the authors showed that if you explain to people things like the illusion of causality, explain this vulnerability to them, people become less vulnerable to some of these ideas which exploit the illusion of causality, because now they know how this virus can enter their brain, and so their brain is adapted to it. And so on this, I would like to conclude my talk and maybe answer some of your questions. I think that we need to be very good at our informational hygiene if we don't want to catch any of these ideas, and we should teach other people to do so as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Panchin. That was a fascinating talk. It's really interesting to hear about these sorts of things that are going on in other countries. And I guess Russia is a long way, both culturally and physically, from New Zealand and Australia. But I guess, it's really, really interesting to sort of see the similarities in the way these ideas are propagated. We've got a few questions from the chat. End of Road asks, do religions destroy the immune system? And the immune system is in quotes, so I don't think anybody's suggesting that religions literally destroy the immune system, but perhaps you can comment on that.
Yeah, in the context of my metaphor. Well, I can give you my opinion on this. So first of all, of course, I know a lot of great scientists who are religious. And so it's not like necessarily destroying all aspects of the immune system, right? However, there is a correlation between religious ideas, religious beliefs, and beliefs in a number of ideas we call pseudoscientific, like astrology, by the way, which is actually fascinating because in Russia, for example, the Orthodox Church is very against astrology, magic, but they are against it not because it doesn't work, but because it's kind of the work of the devil. You shouldn't be tempted to use astrology. But people believe in superstitions and aliens, and this is all positively in Russia at least, and I've also seen international research about this as well. Maybe not all of the subjects I've mentioned. So there is a correlation here, and I think that religion does teach people that it's a good thing to take something on faith, that it is a nobility, that it's
faith.
Faith. And I think that faith is just accepting something that is not proven as if it was true, and thinking that this is a good thing does compromise the immune system to a certain extent.
So maybe the correlation is the other way around, that the immune system is already destroyed, which allows people to accept those ideas. Yes.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, we don't know how this actually works.
Right. Okay. So Carrie NZ asked a very, very big question. How can we treat these viruses?
Yeah. Well, I have several thoughts about this. There was one concern, actually, about treating these viruses. There was a number of papers about the boomerang effect, that when we try to combat bad ideas, people can actually start defending them even more. But then it turned out that these effects, when they try to reproduce them on different kinds of ideas, like anti-vaccines, stuff like that, it's not generally well reproduced. And usually when you show a debunk of some idea that people believe, usually most people, maybe in some cases not, but in most cases people, they tend to lean more towards the scientific idea. So yeah, sure. If one of my favorite YouTube bloggers is Derek Muller, Veritasium, and he actually wrote a thesis about how we can spread scientific knowledge. And one of the conclusions of his thesis was that if it's better when you're doing a video, for example, a video that's trying to say something about science, to first give an example of how you should not, like an erroneous way of thinking about some phenomenon, and then you kind of debunk it, and that increases actually the learning of the students when they see an example of what's wrong, and then you show them what's right instead. So actually, pseudoscience can be used to teach normal science in some cases as well.
Right. Yes. Yeah. When we certainly see teachers here in New Zealand interested in using that sort of technique of actually, and I think that's a good way of teaching critical thinking to children, to be able to spot erroneous ideas. On that note, we have another question from End of Road saying, what did Alex teach those kids who spotted the errors in the science paper?
Yeah. Well, I have another lecture which is called The Science of the Scientific Apocalypse. And in this lecture, I talk about, there are a number of published peer-reviewed studies which were found to be unreproducible. Like, for example, BEM studies on psi, where he would say that people can predict the future in a certain extent in convoluted experiments. And so I use these examples and many other examples to show what kind of experiments can lead to erroneous results because something was not done correctly, like proper control groups were lacking, like cherry picking of data points and things like that. So a lecture was about that.
Very good. Ian Bryce from the Australian Skeptics asks, is the Russian Academy of Science Committee on Pseudoscience similar to skeptics groups?
Well, it's not very similar to skeptic groups because, well, we don't have our own conferences.
Okay.
We are not an active community. It's just a number of people who are experts in different fields. They came together, they have this label on them, and what we do is on our spare time, we give interviews to media, we write texts, and so we kind of use the authority of the Russian Academy of Science to uphold certain ideas. So that's not just some random dude talking about this. This is a member of the Commission on Pseudoscience.
Sure.
So that it's more of a kind of a, I think it's, well, no, actually there were some cases where a lot of effort was involved, of collective effort. Like there's a document about homeopathy. There was about 30 people working together to make it. We discussed homeopathy from the point of view of physics, medicine, biology, chemistry, psychology, all fields together. Like, this is why you believe it works. This is why it doesn't work. This is why it totally doesn't work. There was a very famous case in Russia where this inventor tried to spend billions of Russian taxpayer money on his invention, a filter that would make the water very clean. The filter was not so good, and our chairman of our commission, he spent a lot of time convincing the government that they should not spend money on this, and eventually he won with very hard effort.
Well done. Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Very, very good to see you. Thank you for a wonderful talk, Alex.
Thank you for inviting me.
I wish you a pleasant night's sleep.
Thank you.